Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be creating the Flappy Birds game. So I'm going to be using Python and Pygame to do this, and this video might be a little long, but the whole purpose of this is to give you a good starting point to start to learn Pygame. And I cover most of the basics and I try to go in depth so you can understand what's happening specifically. So I'll just show you how the end result's going to look like. So it's not perfect, but I think it gives a really good starting point to learn Pygame. And if you crash or hit one of the obstacles, the game's going to end and you can start over again. So the first step is going to be to actually install Pygame. So if you're on Mac, open the terminal, and if you're on Windows, go to command prompt. And then you should have pip and Python installed for doing this. So the command is pip install Pygame. So if you run that, it should install it for you. I already have it, so it says requirement already satisfied. Okay, so next you're going to open your favorite editor. I'm going to be using PyCharm for this. First, we're going to be setting up our basic Pygame program. So to do that, we're first going to import the Pygame module, and then later we're going to be doing pygame.init. So this initializes all of the modules inside of Pygame. Later, we're going to call a variable called screen. So screen is going to be where we are actually going to display everything inside of our program. And we're going to do pygame.display.set_mode, and we're going to give the dimensions of the display. So it's going to have a width of 500 pixels and a length of 750 pixels. Later, we're going to put this all inside of a while loop, and the while loop is going to be while running, and in the beginning, it's going to be set to true. And to exit out of that while loop, we're going to change running from true to false. So first, we're going to fill the screen with the color black. So screen.fill, and then you give it RGB values, so 0, 0, 0. And then later, we want to be able to exit out of our Pygame window. So to do that, we're going to be calling events. So this iterates through all the events which take place in Pygame. And if we click the exit button, it's going to trigger this if statement. So if event.type equals to pygame.quit, so if we do press the exit button, it's going to turn running to false. And in that case, we're going to exit out of the while loop. And the last step is to update the display. So each time we iterate through our while loop, it's going to update the display each and every time. And outside of the while loop, you want to quit the program. So pygame.quit. So now that we run this, we can see what we have. Okay, so as we saw, we just have a plain black window, and this is the exit button I was talking about. If we press this, we should quit the program. So I'm going to click this, and it works. So we exited out of the program. So now we're going to add a background quickly. So inside of my directory, I have this picture called background.jpg, and we're going to be using this picture for our background. The background has the same dimensions as our display, 500 by 750, so it's going to fit perfectly. Now, before we do that, I just want to show you how the coordinates work in Pygame. So in Pygame, let's assume this is a Pygame window. The top left has the coordinates of 0, 0. And as you go down, the y coordinates increases. And as you move to the right, the x coordinates increases. So the top right would have the coordinates of 500, 0, because we have a width of 500 pixels. And the bottom left are going to have the coordinates of 0, 750, because we have the length of 750, length of 750 pixels. Okay, so now that we understand how the coordinates work in Pygame, we need to first load in our image. So to do that, we're going to do pygame.image.load, and then we put the path of the background image, so in this case background.jpg. And then later we need to display this. So in order to display the background image, we're going to first display it inside of our while loop after the screen.fill. So we're going to be calling a function called blit, and we're going to be calling this function on the screen. So blit basically draws whatever you give it. So in this case, we're going to draw the background image, and it's going to start drawing at 0, 0. So that means it's going to start drawing at the top left corner, and it's going to cover the whole screen. So now if we run this, we're going to be able to see the same program with the background image. In order to draw the bird, we're going to be using this one image. So this is the Flappy bird, and it has the dimensions of 64 by 64. So we're going to be using those numbers for later calculations. So first we're going to load the image into the variable bird underscore image using the same pygame.image.load. Later we're going to assign it bird x and bird y, which is going to be the x and y coordinates for where the bird is going to be placed. So in our program, we're not going to be moving the x coordinates because in Flappy Bird, the bird either moves up or it goes down. So we're going to have a bird y change. And in the beginning, we're just going to set that to 0. Okay, later we have a display bird. So this is going to draw the bird onto the screen. So screen.blit is going to draw the bird image at the x comma y coordinates. And and the function takes in those two arguments. So we're going to call this function inside the while loop over here, display underscore bird, and then bird x and bird y. And before we do that, we're going to add the change in y to the y variable. Okay, so if we run this, we'll be able to see the bird onto the window. Okay, so now we can see the bird, but there's no functionality to it. It doesn't move up, it doesn't move down. So one thing in Flappy Birds that we need to understand is when we're not doing anything, the bird is going to keep going down. But if we press the space bar, the bird is going to move up. So we need to first add that functionality. So to do that, we're going to go back to our events. So for events in pygame.events.get. So over there, we're going to first look for a key down. So this looks for any time you press a key, this activates. Then later, we want to specifically just look for the space bar. So we're going to do if event.key equals to pygame.k underscore space. So this activates once we press the space bar. So once the space bar is pressed down, it's going to change the bird y to -6. So the y value actually decreases. And when the y value decreases, it goes closer to 0. And as I told you, 0 is on the top. So it goes upwards. Similarly, we're going to have something called key up. So when we release the space bar, this is going to get activated. And if event.key, so this is specific to the space bar. So when we release the space bar, we're actually going to move the y change is going to become -3. So that means that when we're not pressing space bar, +3. So when we're not pressing space bar, we're going to be moving away from the top. So we're going to be moving down. So we're going to get more and more positive. So let's run this and see how it looks. And one more thing is that we're going to, this is why we do this. We add whatever this change is to the original bird y values. Okay, so now if I press, I'm not pressing anything right now. So if I press spacebar for the first time, you can see it goes down. But now when I press it again, it goes up. So if I hold it, it goes all the way up. So if I keep tapping it, it goes up like that. But one thing you should realize is there's no boundaries. So if I leave it, it goes all the way down and it keeps going down. So now we need to add some boundaries. Okay, so now we're going to add those conditions. So first we have if the y value is less than or equal to 0. So 0 is the topmost part of the window. And if we're less than 0, that means we're above that. So every time that happens, it's going to make it back to 0. So you won't be able to go above the top. Now, similarly for the bottom, I'm just going to run this real quickly. So I chose 571 instead of 750, and there's a reason to that. Because over here, as you can see, we have a border. So we don't want to cross, so it can't go below this border. So with trial and error, this is around 570. So if I press enter now, as you can see, it doesn't go below that border. Similarly, if I press spacebar, and it won't cross the top. So now it has a boundary which it won't be able to cross. Right now, we're going to be making the obstacles, or these pipes over here. So To do that, we're going to be using the draw rectangle function in Pygame. So there's two things we want to notice here. So first, we have obstacles that keep coming, and the height is always different. And even though the height is different, the space in between the top and the bottom obstacle remains the same throughout. Okay, so we're going to keep this in mind and make the program. Okay, so in our obstacle, we're going to have, the width is going to be the same. So obstacle width, I made it 70 pixels. We're going to keep the color the same, obstacle color. So this is like a light green color if you want to follow it. Okay, now the difference comes in the height. So in order to get a random height, I'm going to be using the random package. So to do that, you need to import random. It should come inbuilt with Python. So yeah. So once you import random, you're going to call random.randint and then 150, 450. So this is going to take an integer value between 150 to 450, including 150 and 450. So this is going to be the height we use for our top obstacle. Then afterwards, you have the x change. So the obstacle is going to start on the right hand side and it's going to move to the left. So it's going to start here and it's going to move to the left. So it's going to go closer to 0. So we're going to move negatively. So hence we made it -4. And then the x position is going to be 500. So 500 is the ending of the screen. So it's always going to start at the ending. Okay, so now we're going to make a function to actually display the obstacle. And this function is also going to make the top and the bottom obstacle. So first we're going to be making the top obstacle. So to do this, we're going to do pygame.draw.rect. So this helps us draw a rectangle. So first you want to call screen. So this is where you want to draw the rectangle. Then later the color. So obstacle color, we already defined this. And now you want to do obstacle X. So it starts off at the same X position. But what's different is for the top obstacle, you're going to start drawing at 0. So you're going to start drawing from the top and it's going to go down. So your y is going to be 0. And the obstacle width stays the same. Now the difference comes with the height. So the height you give here is going to be the height that comes out of this. So this height could be anything. It could be anything from 150 all the way to 450. Now using that, we need to find out the height of the bottom one. So if we know the height of this is 300, we need to find what should be the height of the bottom one. So the length from this border over here all the way to top is 635 pixels. Now, in order to find the remaining height, we take the height of the top obstacle and subtract that with 635. So that gives us what the remaining height is. Now, the gap between the top and the bottom are going to be the same throughout. So in this case, we're just going to say the gap is 150 pixels. So then from that remaining space, we subtracted other 150 pixels to get the height of the bottom bottom obstacle. Now we can draw the bottom obstacle by doing pygame.drawRectangle, rect, and then screen, obstacle color, obstacle x is the same, but now you want to start at 635. So that means you're going to be starting to draw from here. So you're going to draw starting here. And then the height is the bottom obstacle height, but notice that it's negative because we're going to draw this obstacle starting from here and it's going to go up. So when you want to go up, you're going to go closer to 0, so it's going to be negative. Now if we call this function in our while loop, what's going to happen is it's only going to give us one obstacle and then that's it. But we want to give it obstacles, we want obstacles to come continuously. So to do that, first what we're going to do over here is we want to add the change in x to our x value of the obstacle so it moves. Now we're going to put an if statement here. So if the x value of obstacle is less than or equal to -10, it's going to reset the x value and it's going to generate a new obstacle height. So why are we doing this? So how this works is, let's say I have an obstacle here, and as it moves, at one point it's going to reach around here, which is, this part is around 10. So once it touches that, what's going to happen is that obstacle is going to go away And we're going to form a new obstacle starting from the beginning over here with a new height. And then after we do that, we want to display the obstacle with the new obstacle height. But for the first iteration, it's going to be using this height. So this is just for the first iteration. Okay, so now if we run this, so you can see it generates the obstacles, and then each time it's a different height. It's completely random. But one thing you notice, there's no collision detection. Like nothing happens. Even if you hit the obstacle, nothing's going to happen. We're now going to be creating a collision detection function for our program. So first I'm going to show you how this is going to look like. So first, our first step is going to check if the obstacle is at the same location as our bird. And if that is true, we need to see whether or not the bird is in between the two obstacles. So an easy way to see this is to see if the bird's y is greater than this. So if that is true, that means that it is colliding. And if the bird's y is less than this height over here, that also means that we have a collision. So keeping in mind those two are conditions, we can make our own function. So in our function, we're going to take quite a few arguments. We need to know where the obstacle is in the x location, the height of the top obstacle. So basically that's going to give us this value over here. And then we also need to know this value. And we can find this value by simply adding 150, because 150 is the gap between these two, to this value. So that we're going to call that the bottom obstacle height, and we need the y direction, y location of our bird. So first we need to check if the obstacle is at the same place as our bird. So we're going to check at 50 because that's where we draw the bird, and the ending of the bird is at 50 plus 64 because the bird has a width of 64 pixels. Now we're going to check for the height of the obstacle and whether the bird is in between the gap. So if the bird is not in, if the bird is above the obstacle height, so if it is above this height, it means we have a collision. Now the second part of it, this part, it checks for whether the bird is below this height. And if it is, we also have a collision. And in that case, it's going to return true. And if this is not true, it's going to return false, meaning we don't have any collision. Now we're going to be calling this inside of our while loop. So we're going to set it to a variable called collision, and we're going to give it all the parameters it needs. And like I said, for our bottom obstacle height, we're just going to add the height of the top obstacle height plus 150. So if we do have a collision, we're just going to quit the program for now. So if we have a collision, pygame.quit. So let's see how this works. Okay, so as you can see, there's no collision happening right now. But now let's say we touch the top, so it quits. So that means it detected a collision. Now let's check if it's working on the bottom one. So no collision, and now let's say I hit the bottom one. So it has a collision and it stops working. Now we're going to be creating a function which displays the score on the top left corner of our screen. So to do that, first we're going to start off with a score of 0. And since we're going to be displaying our score, we need to first initialize a font. So to do that, we're going to do pygame.font.font, and this is an inbuilt font of Pygame. So we're just going to use that, and 32 is how the size of the font. Now we're going to create a function called score display. So this is actually going to draw or write our score onto the window. So to do that, we're first going to create a variable called display. So this is what is actually going to be drawn onto the screen. So we're going to be using this font, score underscore font. And to that, we're going to render. We're going to be using f string. So what this does is it's going to print out score as it is. And then it's going to change every time the score changes. So the score is 1, it's going to print score 1. If it's 2, it's going to print score 2. So this just gives out the value of the variable. Then we're going to put true, and then you need to put in the color you want it to be. So we're going to be giving it RGB values of the color white. So later we want to write this or draw this onto our screen. So we're going to use screen.blit. what are we going to write? We're going to be writing this, the display. And then where are we going to write it? We're going to write in the top left corner. So I chose 10, 10 for that. So now we need to see how can we actually increase the score. So what I thought is every time we go inside of this if statement, that means that the bird got past the obstacle. So if that happened, that means that the score needs to be increased by 1. So hence the score is increased by 1 around over here. And after we do that, we're now going to display the score. So I'm going to display it down here, call the score underscore display function, and give it the score. So let's see how this looks like when we run it. Okay, so right now the score is 1, then it's 2, 3, and then it keeps increasing by 1 each time we pass an obstacle. And if we crash, it's going to stop. Okay, so I'm going to stop the tutorial over here, and I think that covers a lot of the basics of Pygame, and it gives a good starting point about it. Now, you could add a few more features to this. I'll just show you what I added. So in the beginning, I added sort of a start screen, so it says spacebar to start, and nothing happens unless I press spacebar. So now if I press spacebar, it's going to start running, and let's say I crash. It's going to say new high score because that was my new high score, and then gives out the score. Now I can start the game again by clicking spacebar once again. So if I click spacebar, same thing happens, and now I'm going to get a higher score. So let's say before my high score was 1, now I'm going to get a high score of 4. So right now you can see new high score, and then the high score is 4. So you could add a lot more features to this, and I will be leaving down the code for this in the description. I'll put a link to my GitHub, and I'll add as many comments as I can so you can understand what's going on in the code. Thanks for watching, and do consider to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and any feedback is really helpful.